From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Christos Anesti, may the 4th be with you, or go Knicks. Whatever applied this weekend, I hope you've had a good one. Special Sunday night and the start of the fire up here for a long week on Paul Murray Live. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, as you know by now, yet another example about radicalised teenagers. In less than a month, we have now had a scenario of multiple moments when teenagers end up being known to police, and the reason for doing what is alleged to have been done is the wildest of interpretations, a bastardisation of their faith. You know the latest here, Western Australia, 16-year-old shot. Why? Because they were lunging towards police with a knife. The allegation previously was that the knife had been used in an earlier attack. Police explain exactly what took place.
He rushed one of the officers who was holding a taser, and the taser was deployed. A second taser was also deployed. Both of them didn't have the full desired effect, and the male continued to advance on the third officer with the firearm, who fired a single shot and fatally wounded the male.
Now, it is not an invention by anyone. It is the evidence that has been given by police based off the Islamic community in this western part of Perth that have come forward to say that the 16-year-old was a radicalised boy. Now, these are, just like every other situation we've been talking about, people that are born in this country. The Commissioner said that a number of people from the Muslim community had called police. They continue to receive multiple calls to 000 from members of the Muslim community, and they'd had concerns both before and after the incident. The teenager posted something online, we don't know what it is, that made them concerned, but we believe that he sent relevant messages to some of the members who immediately responded by calling police. And as the police said, they again wanted to thank the members of the Muslim community who picked up the phone and gave them a call. Now, this is a lone wolf situation, according to the police, but it is not the first time in the past few weeks that we have all had to deal with the reality of teenagers becoming radicalised in this country. What is assumed to be a phenomena of Western Sydney has now played out in Western Australia. Now, the Prime Minister was told months ago that a rise in Islamic terror was going to be one of the major issues that was going to be dealt with by our intelligence organisations. They said there was a 50-50 chance of an attack. In response, the reporting of our dear friend Sherry Markson was that the boss of ASIO and the boss of ASIS had been booted out of National Security Committee. This is the ongoing advice that the federal government gets. Now, they weren't put back as permanent members after the events in Fairfield. They were not put back after multiple teens had been charged. And it's fair to say they will not be put back when it comes to this situation. Instead, climate change is now there as a semi-permanent part of the National Security Committee. And the Prime Minister couldn't even be asked today to elevate this to the situation that it is. He writes a tweet. That's it. No press conference, no interview in Perth, a tweet. With this sort of footballer's language. My thoughts are with those who've been affected by the incident. Well, the police have told us what it was. I've spoken with the WA Premier. I thank the WA Police for acting swiftly to contain the incident. This is the sort of stuff that you bang out if you have no responsibility. For example, something that happens in the middle of the night overseas. This happens in his own country. I've also received a briefing on the situation from the ASIO Director General, who, of course, he had booted out of a regular place to be able to advise him, as well as the AFP Commissioner, and I'm advised there's no ongoing threat to the community. We're a peace-loving nation. There is no place for violent extremism in Australia. Well, the reality is that there are problems in our community. And don't you love that we were able to find all of the details and the data for the crimes that we disapprove of, and understandably we get national promises of action to stop the things that should not be happening within our homes, but absolutely no urgency whatsoever to deal with a situation which has only got worse. You know about the situation in the Church of the Good Shepherd near Fairfield, where the matter is before the courts, so we can't go too much further than there. But you know what that situation is. You also know of 7 teenagers who have been arrested with alleged extremist ideology. Now, as I said last week, I repeat tonight, I'm tired of the game that we have to play here. The game, we pretend that there's equal threats and equal perversions of ideologies and equal, nothing to see here, sort of throw a tarpaulin over the reality and just call it a lump. Now, we showed you last week that within hours of the arrests of the teenagers, where they were not bound together by a love of rugby league and frozen Coke at the movies, they were locked together by a bastardised version of their religion. And in the same way that you have to say it every single time, or some umpire is going to come swinging in through the rafters to shut you down, shut you up, or cancel you. In the same way that we say pedophile priests, we do not mean all Catholics for very obvious reasons. When we talk about radical Islam, Wahhabism, we are not talking about all members of the Islamic faith. But you have to say that every single time or the lobbyists come running for you. And the people who don't want to have the conversation that problems that have existed around the world are now starting to build up here, now. Instead, you watch in the next 24 hours as the hot takes quickly try to change the subject, get it away from the fundamental one that we need to be dealing with, which is now, on 3 separate fronts in less than 1 month, kids that are born in this country are being sent nuts by the stuff that they're seeing on the internet. But the government's response last week, when they got all of the state and territory leaders together, was to ban deepfake pornography. Seriously. When even they summon all of the people together to talk about things like domestic violence, rather than having the stones to all agree to change bail laws that somebody who has form will automatically be denied bail if they come before a court. Oh, here's a little bit of money, we'll place it over 5 years, the biggest number we possibly can, we'll get a headline, move on. What happened to our national conversation about the mental health system a month ago after Bondi? It just disappeared. And the people who will want to say it is time to move on, time not to focus, time not to inflame the situation, there will be people, as sure as the sun comes up tomorrow, that do not want to confront a reality that there are kids that are born here who are being screwed up. Instead, oh no, we're going to pass legislation to crack down on misinformation, which they claimed to be the #1 culprit in stopping The Voice becoming reality. Now, I and you and I both know that the people that are either dead in the car park or currently before the courts are not all of the problem. There are going to be other people amongst us being influenced by people here or afar. Yet, where is the urgency to reassure 27 million people in the country? We are doing everything we can to nip this in the bud, to play whack-a-mole, to go after it in every way, shape or form. Now, because so much of the radicalisation and the communication about radicalisation happens in encrypted apps, I know how hard the task is of the police and the security forces. The reality is they have to get it 100% right, and largely they do, but every now and then something happens, something they couldn't possibly see coming. However, when those things take place, I'd like a little more urgency from the leader of the country than just using the thumb, throw it out, or most likely just sending it to a staffer to write the most innocuous and vague statement. Again, you watch what's going to happen here in the next couple of days. In fact, by tomorrow, people trying to change the subject. Let's all just pause for a second. Let's all just take a deep breath. Let's think about when Bondi happened. Where was the National Cabinet meeting about our mental health system, which is clearly screwed up? Where is the National Cabinet meeting about radicalisation? I'm glad there was one, of course, about domestic violence, but as we showed you at the time, and I repeat tonight, it was Band-Aids and BS. But that's all right, just tap it down, move on, and let's move to the lead up to the budget, as if any of that is more important than any or all of the three things that I've just talked about that we really need to deal with. Now, the assumption, of course, of the politicians is that the 27 million people, they care about the mental health system, but they're not in it, so who cares? They abhor domestic violence, but it doesn't happen to them. And radical Islam, that's just too uncomfortable to talk about. So let's talk about what we're planning to do in the federal budget. No. Our country is changing before our eyes. The leadership that refuses to stand in the way of the changes for the negative become part of the problem. And a perfect example about the behaviour of the Prime Minister is an extraordinary story, I've got to tell you, from Sydney. Now, we know the Prime Minister this time last week was pretending he definitely didn't make the organisers of the domestic violence rally cry, even though we know he did. And even by the middle of the week, there were people that were writing this whole series of hate and hit pieces on Twitter about the woman who organised the rally, who has not been heard from since she criticised the Prime Minister. She's still there, just no doubt doesn't want the pylon that comes with when you have a go at this bloke. Well, as you know, this Prime Minister has been grossly ineffective in talking about the protections of the Jewish community after the events of October the 7th. But remember, virtually no rage after the protests at the front of the Opera House on October the 9th. So that's before we even get into the obvious complications, difficulties and disaster of the past 6 and 7 months about what has been happening in Gaza. Instead, these vague, don't escalate things. Well, he eventually turned up to a synagogue. He did today. He's done this in the past, but he decided to do it over the weekend, where he met with a series of rabbis. He's met with a Labor MP, where apparently he was talking the talk about how offensive some of the student-based protests have been. But an interesting piece in the Australian over the weekend, there was one person who actually represents the area of Sydney in the New South Wales Parliament where this synagogue is, Kelly Sloan. Kelly Sloan, I think, is an excellent local representative, and I think will probably end up becoming the Liberal Party leader at some point in time. She's a good, smart, focused person who loves her community. But guess who was banned from going to the event in her local area with all of the other representatives? None other than Kelly. We read from the Oz together. Anthony Albanese bans Kelly Sloan from Jewish meeting. On an issue arguably resistant to political silliness, the queer-centred brinksmanship still pervaded Albo's visit. We hear his office called ahead to the synagogue and insisted the Liberal MP Kelly Sloan, the state MP for Vaucluse, be barred from attending the event. Reasons not provided. Now, of course, what Albo doesn't want is anyone apart from his side of politics in the room, either because he thinks they'll leak against him and optics is more important than everything else, or he wants to deny anyone but his own political party the opportunity to be part of a solution. Because then if there is some sort of a solution or a harming, then it's the Labor Party, rather than all sides of politics, that get credit. Now, Kelly Sloan has previously attended events with the Prime Minister. She was laying wreaths out the front of Bondi with the Premier, the local mayor, the federal MP, and the entire political spectrum was there. But when it came to this scenario, no, she was to be banned, not allowed in. I look forward to this story, of course, being feverishly denied, filed under misinformation, and under the laws they want to bring into the country, something that they would ban social media companies from presenting. But that is the reality of what took place in that meeting with the synagogue. Now, if you think, oh, OK, but hang on, Paul, maybe it was just the Prime Minister. And, you know, Prime Minister doesn't have to bring everyone along. Guess who went to the meeting with him? That would be Allegra Spender. So at the synagogue, the local federal MP, who's a Teal, not a Labor person, was there. The local state MP told, not allowed. Apparently, one of the discussions that was had, because the rabbis were willing to speak, was he spoke about the Sydney University encampments, the protesting that's been happening there, allegedly in the name of the people of Gaza, but of course lots of screwed up ideas that are on top of that. Anthony Albanese apparently says that it's all just trots. One source of the meeting, convened by the councils of the rabbis and the Jewish leaders, claimed that Mr Albanese said a lot of university protests were, quote, just trots who were looking to instigate and make trouble. Now, I agree with him, but does he have the stones to say it outside the private meeting where hopefully no one from the Liberal Party is going to tell us what he actually says to one group? One of the people in the room said, yes, Albo said the thing about the trots. Another bloke says that that's what he labelled them. It was very dismissive of them. Yet the Prime Minister has not said such things in public about the protests because he knows, just like his mate Joe Biden, that he needs the votes of the left to vote for him or the far left to vote for the Greens, but preference the Labor Party. Now again, Australia has a right to free speech, which means a right to protest. Literally, the Aboriginal Tent Embassy has been out the front of Old Parliament House for decades now. As long as people don't end up jumping into the buildings and start smashing things up, well then, under free speech, they're allowed to stay. As soon as they start openly and directly intimidating students, well then we'll have another conversation. But it gives you an idea about this bloke. He'll say one thing privately, but what does he say publicly about this stuff? Meantime, what about Jason Clare? Now, Jason Clare is the Education Minister, and today he was out and about spruiking some changes that are allegedly about cost of living, but really, again, it's just the government trying to save its own backside with those younger voters, because if they turn on them for whatever reason, then they'd lose a majority government, and God forbid they did that. Well, as you know, this bloke has more positions in the Kama Sutra on what's going on here. Firstly, about some of the slogans being chanted at some of these encampments and certainly protests which are happening around the country. Firstly, this is what he says.
Any words that stoke fear in our community or make people not want to go to university are intolerable here.
But no suggestion that they should stop using those terms as part of the protests or that anyone involved in those protests should be booted out of the universities. No, none of that. The other sort of each way elbow, well, this, again, about the slogans like Intifada.
I've seen people say that those words mean the annihilation of Israel. I've seen people say that it means the opposite. I've seen people say that they're slogans that Israeli political parties have used here.
And then there's just this.
In a free country like Australia, there is always the right to protest, but it must be done peacefully. It must be done responsibly. There is no place for fear and intimidation and hate. That's why it's incumbent on all of us. And I include politicians, religious leaders, community leaders, student leaders, members of the media here. We've just got to dial the rhetoric down, get the temperature to come down a little bit here, and work work together to try and bring the country together rather than letting it be torn apart.
Yeah, if we could just shh. Okay. Here's the thing. You can agree or disagree with people like Ed Husick, but I admire that he's been direct and he says what he believes about what's taking place in the Middle East. He believes that Israel's response has gone too far and continues to go too far each and every day. You can agree or disagree with former Labor MP Michael Danby, who believes the absolute destruction of Hamas must take place, and yes, that means there's going to be consequences, and at the moment those consequences, while unfortunate, are part of the war on the terrorist group who committed October the 7th. But the idea that this guy in Jason Clare, who considers himself to be a future leader one day, but comes from a community with a significant Islamic population, he's not picking a lane. Now, he doesn't have to pick up the cudgels and speak the words of the politicians or the protesters of which he agrees or disagrees with, but he can't pretend as a thinking human being, let alone a member of parliament, let alone a cabinet minister, that he doesn't have a view. Instead, he's out there pretending, well, you know, I've been told that intifada means this and I've been told it means that. Well, which do you think it is? But instead, just like the radicalisation stuff, just like sometimes about some of the atrocities of Gaza, just turn it all down. Minimise, calm it down, change the subject. That doesn't help anyone. Now, sure, screaming and ranting and raving and pointing and you're the good guy and you're the bad, that's not going to help either. But when you're asked a direct question about the protests and the things they're saying, well, you can come to a bit of a better conclusion than he did. But of course, by saying nothing, he now skirts, which means we move on to another day of pre-budget speculation, countdown to the budget. Who cares? One of the great issues that is causing Australians huge trouble at the moment are the number of places that are around to rent. Now, I've laid off this subject for a couple of weeks just to give you a little relief from what almost was sort of nightly commentary, but the problem is just as bad as the last time we were talking about it. You want to find a rental property, these are the lines that you confront, let alone the cost of it, let alone the quality of the place. And if you dump in hundreds of thousands more people, which of course this federal government is determined to do, then it is only going to end up in a scenario where those lines get longer on top of a whole bunch of other things. Well, a fairly wealthy lady has had a fairly stupid idea, but I wanted to bring it to you. Back to Allegra Spender. Now, of course, the TLMP who represents the seat of Wentworth, full of rich people, but also full of a lot of renters too. She's got an idea. You should be able to rent out your spare bedroom in your mansion. And if you do that, then you shouldn't be forced to pay more tax. That will solve the housing crisis, apparently. Spender said there were plenty of older people with spare bedrooms or a granny flat. This will be fun for everyone watching us right now. The kids have grown up, they've gone home, you've got a spare room. Well, Allegra thinks that you should be renting it out to a complete stranger. In a community of 45% renters, it's really hard at the moment out there for their community, for people in the community. If we can bring some more supply on, even for the next 2 or 3 years, so come on in, family, let's share. She knows that Curb Your Enthusiasm wasn't a documentary, right? When he took in the family from New Orleans. But also the suggestion here is one that is so freely made by someone with spare bedrooms, or in her case, spare houses. Now, again, I don't have a problem with wealthy people being part of our political discourse, but this is not a solution that's going to play out anywhere in Australia with people saying, you know what, great idea. If you've got spare space and for whatever reason you want to share it with other people, you can charge rent or not. The idea that you wouldn't charge rent because of the tax implications seems to me like a fairly kind of rich person response to the scenario, as opposed to somebody going, cool, I'll just rent out the granny flat, and then 6 months later, what, I've got to pay extra tax on it? That'd be the normal reaction. But she's not quite from our world in terms of just normal suburban world. No fault, she's born the way she is, that's it. But still, she is, she's got interests in, well, a collection of companies. This is all according to her own her own declarations on the website. So that's fine. She's got plenty of cash. She's also got, well, a lot of family trust action going on as well. But the one of particular interest is a politician who owns 4 houses is telling you what you should do with your one. Hence why I say, great idea if you've got 3 spare houses. For everyone else, probably not a genius idea. But of course, by criticising a Teal, I'm sure there's something sexist I've just said in there, to which, of course, I sincerely apologise. Now, I've got to bust a bit of BS from the PM and his team in and around one of the lines they've been running. Now, remember, we've picked them up plenty of times when they say this. Remember when they turned around and said that one of the problems with everything to do with the people released from the High Court was because it was the Tony Abbott era that got the legislation wrong, when it was actually Julia Gillard's government that got the legislation wrong. But that was a talking point that got them through the day, no consequence, a bit like when the Prime Minister last week goes to a National Cabinet meeting, is asked a question about domestic violence, it's all about domestic violence, but he's asked a question about his own football team and whether he feels sorry for the coach that had just been sacked, and he answered the question, and no consequences. Imagine if Scott Morrison or Tony Abbott had answered a question about football during a domestic violence press conference post a National Cabinet meeting. But just like the lie about the Gillard, not Abbott legislation, he just is able to skate. Well, another example of it. You may notice that one of the things that Labor Party people have been saying after the arrest of a person who should still be in detention when it comes to immigration, but because of the High Court decision and the government's bungling of it, he was out. As you know, he also wasn't wearing an ankle bracelet before being alleged to go on to commit a very significant assault. Well, all last week, the Labor Party was saying, not our fault, nothing to do with us, no connection, no way we can blame the clueless Claire or the idiot Andrew Giles.
If it was up to me, I assure you that there wouldn't have been bail granted in that case. But these things are done independently. I think that's a wrong decision by that board.
The Prime Minister's made clear that some of the decisions that were made by different agencies were not what he would have made, and I think that message has been sent loud and clear. Well,
guess who has been able to go back and look at the receipts of who is actually ultimately responsible for this system? Well done to the ABC for actually going back and having a look at when the independent board was established, who had ultimate say over the decisions made by that board. Well, Border Force, who are of course in part put in charge of trying to implement our immigration policies in this country, or lack thereof when it comes to this particular government. Well, guess what? Border Force has turned around and said, it's actually the Minister, not us or even this board, that has the final say on the decisions of this board. Now, Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles, towards the end of last year, made a collection of decisions that, remember, they were pushed into by the opposition, but then they turned around and tried to have a crack at the opposition about, and all were so tough. But well done to Matthew Doran and Tom Lowry from the ABC, because they went back, had a look, and they came up with this. In December, the government established the Community Protection Board, tasking the non-statutory body with providing advice on how individual cases should be managed. In a joint statement at the time, so there's a press release, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill and Immigration Minister Andrew Giles said the board would, quote, advise the Australian Border Force Commissioner and the Minister for Immigration, that's Giles, on the management of individuals in the group released due to the decision of the High Court. The boss specifically of the Border Force is Michael Ottram. And in February, Mr Giles also said that, quote, decisions, end quote, about conditions were made by the board. But during an estimate hearing, where he is, of course, grilled by senators, including our mate James Patterson, in February, he was asked by the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, James Patterson, and the Border Force Commissioner was asked directly, who is the final decision maker? He was told by the head of Border Force it was Mr Giles. The Minister on the recommendation of the board and the endorsement of the Commissioner. So, there may well be a piece of paper where the person currently behind bars in Western Australia stand accused of that horrific assault had the ankle bracelet removed because of the decision of the board that was appointed by this minister, by Claire O'Neill, by Anthony Albanese, to keep an eye on the more than 150 people who came out as a result of the High Court decision. And there could well be a piece of paper or a single decision where the paperwork made its way up to the immigration minister that this bloke no longer was wearing an ankle bracelet. If that's the case, I hope somebody puts forward the Freedom of Information request, and I hope that when it comes out, whenever it comes out, that the Prime Minister does what he should have done months ago and sack this bloke, or that he resigns. More likely, the piece of paper may well have just got lost, maybe redacted, like many other things this government tries to hide under the couch. Or, of course, there's no piece of paper at all, which means they're lying now when they say it's a completely independent decision and nothing made its way to the minister, or they were lying then when they said that decisions would end up coming to the minister. Wait, watch and see. But of course, what will the press gallery do tomorrow? Despite the fact that the ABC has actually served up on a platter the receipts and shown who, what, where, when, and how everything they said last week was garbage and BS. Let's see. Turn on your telly tomorrow morning, open up your newspaper, check online, and see if this story goes anywhere. Because I think we both know what will happen. They'll try to tone down the rhetoric. Just throw a tarp over it. Just call it a lump. We've got lots to talk about tonight here on Paul Murray Live. Andrew Bogut joins us in a moment or two's time. But, of course, no sooks, no lefties. I'd also like to know, what is your bold prediction for the week ahead? We're just getting started. Big one here this Sunday night on Paul Murray Live. Thank you so much for watching this Sunday night. With us, as always, is carryover champ and, of course, the man who is by Pauline Hanson's side in Canberra, but also trying to run for the seat of Keppel in the upcoming Queensland election. Fingers crossed for our mate James Ashby. Lovely to see you, dear man. Another than the wonderful Christy McSweeney is, of course, the PR counsel with just 10 out of 10 bangs, Dale. Well done. Whatever's going on, keep it happening, right? And send their...
Thank you.
Yeah, send the hairdresser my number and I'll pay full price. Anyway, now, let's talk here
It's
about...
Melbourne, we're stylish.
Yeah, aren't you just? All right, now, James, forgive me, it's a Sunday night, we can have these chats every now and then where we can just press pause on the daily sort of keeping up with all the craziness that's around. How does Albo get away with it all the time? And I mean this in the sense today, the ABC freaking C lays out chapter and verse, who, what, where, that they've been lying all last week about the arm's length independent board that can't possibly, when presumably the decisions of the board, including about whether people do or don't have ankle bracelets, goes all the way up to the minister, so the minister has at least line of sight to it. It's all out there. They were able to piece back together what happened at Senate estimates, but what, is it too complicated for the press gallery to turn this into a longer than 10-minute story?
Well, we know the ABC's been biased for at least a decade now, and that's why so many people have turned off it. That's why their ratings are through the floor, and no one knows how to fix it apart from those on the Conservative side. Firstly, there should be, honestly, get rid of the funding that we give them federally, over $1 billion a year, and make them try and stand on their own 2 feet with advertisers. They just wouldn't last. Look, they get a free run on the ABC, this government, and so many of the other networks, because of the simple fact that we have more and more and more left-leaning journalists. And there is this, mythical hype about them all trying to give Labor a free run, because in the end, Labor offer them jobs. That's what this is all about, jobs in the end. You've got to have a look at the Labor Party here in Queensland. They went and stole half of Channel 9 staff before the last election, promised them jobs, so they got favourable advertising, favourable news stories, and that's exactly what they do on the federal front. It's just awash with corruption. And I say that not lightly, because, there are plenty of people that want to enter the media who want to do the right reporting, but they get caught up with these, fancy $300,000 jobs on offer if they can grease the palms of politicians. I hate it.
Well,
That's what it is.
Well, absolutely. And even when the story comes from that organisation on the most favourable terms, they still don't think that it's pierced their armour. It's just everyone else in the room will say, oh, look, we don't follow up on this. Again, Christy, you know, a very, very dear friend of mine who is remarkably famous yet still talks to me, and I appreciate it. Every now and then will say, it's all about the benefit of the doubt, right? That politicians, comedians, performers, comment, whatever, as long as you maintain benefit of the doubt, generally speaking, you'll be able to work out if somebody's going to survive something or whether they're going to have their knees cut out. Now, I understand that there are the people who like the new broom that's 2 years old, and they like the access that comes with it and all the reset in the relationships. But last week, the PM answers a question about his own football team after a national cabinet meeting about domestic violence. If it was any other Liberal, that'd be a week's worth of outrage, right? Like just, the easiest job the opposition would ever have. This one, bang, that story was gone by the time the night was over. And then now a more substantive, complicated, but detailed account of them lying last week doesn't get picked up anywhere. How are they able, I mean, in practical terms, right? You know how that building works. How do they get away with it?
Well, first of all, I think that the Albanese government has learnt from the very successful spin masters and complicated piling inquiries on top of regulation, on top of reports. That was the Andrews government here in Victoria. And I'm sure they've been reading the playbook. Now, the Prime Minister has tried to build in an arm's length process into this immigration debacle so he can say to the electorate, it's an independent decision. But what the electorate needs to know, what we all know, and you asked me about being an insider in Parliament, what any person involved in governing knows is that the Immigration Minister has unique powers to make decisions and to execute decisions in the portfolio. Unlike a lot of other ministers, that immigration power, the ultimate decision rests with the minister, and it was ever thus. And it's a grey area, this reporting line of what this Community Protection Board, who was it established by and what the ultimate reporting line is. And I commend the ABC for doing the work because the government is trying to spin its way out of it by making it what we call a process story so they can talk about process and bamboozle the public with talk about boards and process and independent decisions to make them sound authoritative about it. When in actual fact, it's more protection.
Again, a different but well-known person was explaining to me a long time ago, disagrees with everything I have to say now, and I think it's just technically responds to my Merry Christmases as, okay, I don't want to be the bad guy. But still, that's life. James, you know these people, right? It's the former life. Anyway, was talking about how in any situation, if you're arguing the black and white, you're winning. As soon as you're trying to defend the grey or you're arguing in the grey, then you start to lose, right? Because things are sometimes too complicated, too boring. I've got other things going around, which is why you try to make things as clean and as simple as possible, and why I think Christy's right about by overloading process, it means despite the fact there are people and decisions, they just make it seem like, oh, it's an old Gemini that broke down on the side of the road and, water pumps break and stuff. Yeah, I think it's odd.
I've got a problem with a lot of the politicians today who will not go on a lot of programs and actually debate these subjects. I get the fact that these are tough debates to have with lefties or journalists that are more in tune with that progressive way of thinking. But someone's got to front up from the coalition, from One Nation. I say it to our team all the time. Don't shy away from these tough interviews, because at the end of the day, you may come off feeling as though you've lost to the majority, but there's still an audience out there that may only be able to pick up a certain frequency, in a tractor out in the middle of nowhere, and that often is the ABC. I always say to our people, go and have those discussions, go and have those robust debates with those ABC journalists and anyone you can think of that may not necessarily agree with you, because we've got to start pushing back. Otherwise, we're going to be zip-lipped and no one's going to actually hear an opposing opinion or an opposing view. So it's a real challenge that a lot of these Conservatives have got to face themselves. Man up, front up, turn up and do these interviews because there are, Conservative people that want to hear from you. Put the debate forward.
I'm with you. Two speed rounds, and then I'm going to get to a bold prediction before we get to Andrew Bogut. Lots of wokeness in sport we'll go through with him. Today, Prime Minister says $3 billion worth of student debt gets forgiven. Christy, put simply, are we talking about a scenario here where the debt you owe the government, they roll back by about $1,200 per person, or they just aren't adding the increase to the next 12 months worth of debt, so it's really the government letting the government off the government?
Well, it's really the government now coming into line to behave like every other financial institution in the country. If the government was MasterCard, I think there'd be a national outrage with punters. And if they were a publicly listed company doing this, it would be against all governance laws whatsoever. So, yes, people aren't going to get their debt wiped. The process has changed, and that process is a good thing. And I'll just make the point too, the Coalition wiped $500 million of vet fee help student debt too, which was a recovery of all those poor students who were caught up in the Gillard government's vet fee help dodgy RTO rorts. Didn't help them capture young voters out there as well. So I know that the government's hoping that this will capture younger voters, or at least keep them their way instead of going to the Greens. So let's see. I
think we all know that even if they vote Victorian socialists, they're still going to end up preferencing the Labor Party here. James, you got one on this?
Yeah, I've got to say to you, Paul, they haven't gone far enough here. What happens is with those students, they're paying off their weekly HECS debt. They do it every week. It comes out of their wages or fortnightly. The problem is that money is quarantined until after the end of financial year, and then it's applied to their debt. So in the meantime, they're actually putting this CPI against their debt before they actually subtract off the money that they've paid off. If it was a home loan, it'd be completely different. You're actually paying down your debt there from every payment that goes out. But this is something that the government needs to look at as well, because students are getting stiffed. This is just one part of it.
Well, by the way, it's a $23 a week change. Thank goodness the government's there, along with their $15 a week too little, too late tax cuts. But it's $1 billion, blah 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 blah, and of course, media eats it up rather than uses a calculator to divide by 52. All right, give me the fastest version of this you can. Your bold prediction for the week ahead, Christy.
Look, I think we're going to see. I think there's enough momentum in the community now around, well, government, you're doing nothing about domestic violence. We've seen the federal government come out and not blame the states, but just gently point out that the states aren't doing what they should. I think there's enough anger in the community that we will demand a national cabinet. If we can do it for COVID, why can't we do it to actually make good decisions, like stopping domestic violence and making sure the states are rolling out and meeting those KPIs that they need to have from the federal
just settle for all of the state and premiers.
Where it needs to go.
I'm with you, but I just agree with all the state and territory leaders agreeing to the one A4 piece of paper that they'd all put into the parliament, saying that if you've got form in domestic violence in your current or former relationship, at any time you go before a court, automatic bail will not be given. They could do it tomorrow, they could pass it in the parliament at the first opportunity, but instead, but I'm with you about the ongoing focus.
James. Can.
I've got to say, Paul, I'll keep it short and sweet. Can I just ask the Prime Minister to slow down with the content, because I can't keep up with the Please Explain episodes and all this stuff he keeps giving us every single week.
It is
too much. This week, please slow down.
This week was great, and again, I thank you so much for the cameo. The little cell is sitting in the office. I do appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Talk to you again next week. And yes, those Please Explain cartoons, make sure you find them on Paul and Hanson's Facebook page. I'll post them up on our socials, or just go searching on the One Nation website. Rum, gin and all the rest of it there as well. More in a sec here on Paul Murray Live. Andrew Bogut joins us next on the Woke World of Sport. Andrew Bogut, legendary Australian athlete in the sport of basketball, but of course, a good here as well on his podcast, the Rogues Bogues podcast. We talk to him every couple of weeks. Great man, lovely to see you. So, I'm not going to say suburban footy was kind of slightly above suburban footy, but not quite. The Fitzroy Lions took on the Elizabeth Eagles this weekend and they beat them 516 points to 0. surely there should be a mercy rule at 82 goals. When do you cancel a game? When do you say we're not playing the fourth quarter?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm not sure if everyone showed up for Elizabeth, but we're in the right division. But yeah, you hate to see that kind of stuff. I guess it's at the senior level at least, but yeah, junior sports, it definitely wouldn't be kosher. There definitely needs to be a mercy rule, but that's kind of where we're at with some of these divisions and sports. There's just so many of them these days that you can't filter out competitions.
Now, of course, right now there's all sorts of basketball being played around the world. A lot of focus right now on the NBA finals. New York Knicks, I'm rather excited, but we don't get too excited. I'm not one of those idiots. I'm still surprised they're going okay, and I'm pretending it's not happening, but we'll see what happens. But what about the bloke who says that he's not going to answer questions unless people subscribe to his podcast?
Yeah, Patrick Beverley, real interesting one. He had a real horror night. He actually threw a ball at a fan. Ball went in the crowd. They threw it back out. He threw it back at him twice behind their bench.
Wow.
And then went on to follow on to that interview that you're talking about, where an ESPN reporter asked him a question, and he asked if she subscribed to his podcast. She said no, and he said, you can't ask me any questions then. I think he was trying to be tongue-in-cheek, but there was no apology given. So it's horrible. He's a really gritty, tough role player that's just, I don't think he's done himself any favors over the last couple of years with his mouth. And I think ESPN have since said that he will no longer, he's basically suspended from any of their shows, which hurts his media brand because he's close to retirement. So kind of backfired for him.
Yeah, 100%. Also, let's talk about referees. I admire people who want to go and be referees. Certainly, my brother-in-law, g'day Danny, was always into it from a teenager all the way through to today, right? That was how he kept fit, and that was how he was able to get close to the sport that he loves. But the abuse is nuts. It's happening all the time. But now, as we're trying to get, more teenage women and teenage girls and then adult women to get involved, the abuse just is wild at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it is. I mean, I've got two young kids in junior sport, and the fella on the PA at the stadium we play at is always reminding parents not to yell at referees, and he's usually kicks out a couple every weekend from abusing either coaches, players, or if happens at the senior level. Look, I think there's a line where you want to train your officials to be able to accept criticism, know that a player might fire up at him, barring not including abuse, but a bit of talking like, "Well, how'd you call that?" And then you let them calm down, and if they continue on, you give them a technical foul, or in footy, a 50-metre penalty, or whatever it is, a penalty. But there is a line on abuse. As soon as it becomes abusive, and it's directed directly at a referee, I think you have to address it harshly. But I think we've got the balance wrong. I think the AFL went real crazy with their what was the wording there? I can't remember the wording they used, but to disrepute or something like that, and they'll hand out 50-metre penalties like lollies, and now you've got the other side where they're probably letting too much. So there's a fine line, and good referees usually will allow you to engage with them and maybe have a blown fuse for 10, 15, 20 seconds, and then if you keep going, they'll penalise you. So it goes both ways, but yeah, you got to draw the line completely on any abuse.
And just quickly, in your career, when you felt it bubbling up, what did you do?
Oh man, I get a technical foul usually, but yeah, look, it's tough. Look, and then I had referees that I really respected that would engage in you. You could go up to them and say, "Hey, how did you call that? What did you see?" And they'd actually engage. The ones that really got on my nerves were the ones that wouldn't even talk to you, and I'd usually get a technical foul. But look, it's the age-old. Try to walk away, try to count to 10, but it's a passionate game. We're human beings. We make mistakes as players, so do referees. You just want to have a good relationship there, but sometimes there's players and refs that have had a history, and all that kind of stuff comes into play. So it is hard, and both jobs are tough. Players have it tough because they're under pressure for contracts and playing time. Referees have it tough because people are booing and yelling at them all game long. There's always one side of a team that's strictly unhappy with the refereeing. So it's kind of a thankless job, in my opinion.
Good stuff. Nice to talk to you. We will talk. Yeah, correct. All right, we will talk again. In the meantime, lots of basketball on the Rogues Bogues podcast. There's lots to talk about and a whole lot more. Thank you, mate. Andrew Bogut joining us from Melbourne. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Royal Report getting ready, about 4 minutes away. We're done for tonight. Here's the Royal Report. We'll see you tomorrow night on the show, where none other than Matt Canavan and Sam Crosby agree on everything.